U.S. Air Force wants to test robotic boom control on old KC-135 tanker. The U.S. Air Force wants to build a fake airplane tail in an Ohio lab, and the reason traces back to one of the most dangerous stretches American aerial refueling crews have faced in over a decade. The Air Force Research Laboratory issued a request for information seeking industry partners to help install what it calls a KC-135 electrified boom automation lab, a facility built around an actual KC-135 tail section that will let engineers test and refine automated versions of the refueling boom, the long, extendable arm a KC-135 crew uses to pump fuel into other aircraft mid-flight. The lab falls under a broader Air Force initiative called Combat Refueling and Operations Networked Universal Systems, or CRONUS, and the notice, published August 6, 2026, sets a response deadline of September 6, 2026, for companies interested in bidding on the work once it becomes a formal contract. The plan calls for the government to acquire an actual KC-135 tail section, complete with a movable boom, from the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group, the Air Force unit that manages the sprawling aircraft storage and parts recovery facility at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, commonly known as the Boneyard. That hardware will be delivered to a contractor as government-furnished equipment and ultimately installed inside a motion capture lab operated by the Air Force Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, a facility normally used to track precise movement data using an array of wall and ceiling-mounted cameras. Whoever wins the eventual contract will need to design a structural support system strong enough to hold the tail section's full weight while it moves, along with an overhead actuation system capable of swinging the boom through its entire refueling range of motion, covering yaw, pitch, and probe extension, all without placing any equipment on the lab floor that might block the motion capture cameras or interfere with their line of sight. That last requirement points to what the lab is actually meant to accomplish. Refueling booms today are flown manually by a specially trained crew member called a boom operator, who lies in a station at the rear of the tanker and physically steers the arm into position to connect with the receiving aircraft's fuel receptacle, a demanding, precision task performed at high altitude and high speed with two aircraft flying in close formation. Building a lab that can move a real boom through its full range of motion while capturing highly detailed movement data gives Air Force researchers a controlled environment to develop and test automated or robotic boom control systems without needing an actual flight test every time they want to try a new approach, letting the service work through the technical kinks of automation on the ground before ever risking the concept in the air. The timing of this push comes against the backdrop of a brutal stretch for the KC-135 fleet during the American military campaign against Iran earlier in 2026. A KC-135 crashed in western Iraq on March 12 after an apparent mid-air collision with another tanker, killing all 6 crew members aboard in what the Air Force described as the first loss of a KC-135, or any Air Force tanker, in 13 years. Just 2 days later, an Iranian missile strike on Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia damaged 5 more KC-135s parked on the tarmac, and some reporting citing satellite imagery has suggested a possible 7th tanker was destroyed or badly damaged in a separate incident during the same campaign, though that specific claim has not been independently verified through official channels. Those losses landed on a fleet that was already showing its age, since the Air Force's own fact sheet notes the last KC-135 rolled off the production line back in 1965, meaning the jets flying refueling missions over Iraq and the Persian Gulf this year were already pushing 6 decades old. That combination of an aging airframe and a costly recent combat deployment helps explain why the Air Force is pursuing automation research on the KC-135's boom specifically now, even though the AFRL notice itself does not directly cite the Iran campaign as its motivation. The service's KC-46A Pegasus, the tanker meant to eventually replace much of the KC-135 fleet, has faced its own well-documented struggles, including a production pause in 2025 after cracks turned up in multiple aircraft, and continuing technical problems with its own refueling boom system, according to the Pentagon's testing office. Leaving the KC-135 as a workhorse, the Air Force cannot simply retire on the original timeline, even as it keeps racking up decades of flight hours and, now, real combat losses. This boom automation effort is not the only modernization push currently working through the KC-135 fleet. A separate, longer-running program called the Center Console Refresh has been moving through the Air Force's acquisition process since early 2025, aimed at overhauling the cockpit instrumentation console that KC-135 crews used to fly the aircraft. With that program's contracting office at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma working through industry questions and a draft solicitation for well over a year before reaching its current, more advanced stage. Running a cockpit modernization program and a boom automation research effort simultaneously across the same aging airframe reflects how the Air Force is trying to squeeze additional decades of relevant service out of a tanker fleet whose replacement program has repeatedly slipped behind schedule.